Welcome to Excellence in Concrete, a series of brief informational podcasts brought to you by the Wire Reinforcement Institute. In this edition, we'll introduce you to some WRI resources that describe the advantages of using welded wire reinforcement, or WWR, in cast-in-place projects.
Where construction requires the repetitious bending and shaping of reinforcement, welded wire reinforcement has often been the answer to faster and more economical production. I'm Barbara Puffer. For the next several minutes, we will hear from Paul Aubee. He's chairman of WRI's Technical Committee and Technical Director for In-Steel Wire Products. Paul will share his thoughts on some uses and resources addressing cast-in-place concrete. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, Barbara. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Paul, when we talk about cast-in-place concrete, what sorts of projects first come to your mind?
Well, it's a broad spectrum, really. When we refer to cast in place, we're talking about concrete elements that are formed and poured right there on the site. These elements can include shallow foundations, slabs on ground, elevated structural slabs, beams and girders, columns, and walls. So these are essentially the building blocks for most all structure types, whether it's high-rise construction, big box type distribution centers, healthcare facilities, environmental structures, stadiums, you name it.
You say WWR is important to the building blocks of structures. Why is welded wire reinforcement particularly useful in the types of projects you named?
Well, cast-in-place construction in general can be a pretty labor-intensive set of operations. So by using welded wire reinforcement on a project, the contractor can save significantly on reinforcement placement time and associated labor costs. These project savings can in turn be passed on to owners who want to see their structures put into service as quickly as possible.
From the designer's perspective, why is welded wire reinforcement such a solid choice for cast-in-place concrete?
Well, I would say interchangeability and structural design familiarity. And what I mean by that is there really isn't a learning curve to be able to specify welded wire reinforcement. It's cited extensively throughout ACI 318, and engineers are able to use the same structural design equations and routines as they're accustomed to using for rebar. So there's not really any proprietary product knowledge that's required.
Is there a particular point in a cast-in-place project where the decision is made to use welded wire reinforcement over, say, the rebar you just mentioned?
Well, ideally, selection of reinforcement type is carried out as early on in the design process as possible. So sometime between the schematic design phase and design development. This is when project attributes that affect structural performance and its constructability are being discussed with the owner and the design team. Now, with that said, there are many instances of welded wire reinforcement being brought into the fold much later on in the process, say during the bidding phase, perhaps as a value substitution proposed by a subcontractor.
So if a contractor's attraction to welded wire reinforcement is time and labor savings on the job site, what sorts of things appeal to the person using it in their design?
Well, I think, structural engineers that I know, they don't intentionally design things to be difficult to build. I think that the most successful engineers try to strike a balance between the responsibility of designing safe and serviceable buildings and preparing the contract documents that present this design in its most constructible form. So they pride themselves on the recognition that they might receive for being constructability-minded designers.
I've got that. So understanding the contractor's issues from the outset is really key to moving the project in the right direction, isn't it?
Certainly. It can also win them repeat business. I think the appeal on the part of the engineer comes in the form of strengthening their reputation as a designer of buildable things. And generally speaking, welded wire reinforcement is about buildability.
That makes perfect sense, Paul. For an engineer who might not be well versed in specifying welded wire reinforcement, what would you tell them?
Well, as crazy as it might sound, my first statement would be a suggestion to maintain rebar thinking.
You said rebar thinking? Really?
Absolutely. Implementing welded wire reinforcement is not like reinventing the wheel from a design standpoint. So to the engineer, I would say don't change your design process, because in reality, the same design calculations and details that you've been using with rebar, well, they also apply to welded wire reinforcement. Now, one simple approach is to build basic permissive language into the contract structural drawings. This would in turn allow welded wire reinforcement as a material substitution in specific applications on the job. So it's sort of a boilerplate method that affords the construction professional some discretion and latitude, but without compromise to the structural design intent of the engineer.
Besides that boilerplate approach that you described, do you have other advice?
Well, I would always remind the designer that welded wire reinforcement and rebar can coexist just fine on most every cast-in-place building project out there. Welded wire reinforcement does many things very well, so does rebar. But in the end, if the focus of the engineer remains on design, characterized by compliance and constructability, and they've included material substitution language, as I noted earlier, then welded wire reinforcement utilization will happen pretty organically.
You've certainly given us a lot to digest here, and we're just about out of time. Does the Wire Reinforcement Institute provide educational or informational materials on this topic?
Oh, certainly. The WRI website it's got a pretty expansive technical section containing publications, charts, tables, statistics. We're also actually closing in on completing a cast-in-place specific webinar that would be linked to the website, and engineers can get continuing education from that. Beyond these static resources, if there are specific technical questions or issues that arise, WRI does address these through a website inquiry form, and there's a customer service phone line listed there on the website as well.
And that website is www.wirereinforcementinstitute.org. It's a resource I'm sure that engineers and contractors alike would want to know about it. Thanks for this snapshot on Cast in Place, Paul. I look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you, Barbara.
You have been listening to Excellence Set in Concrete, a series of informational podcasts about the advantages of using welded wire reinforcement. This easily downloadable program is brought to you by the Wire Reinforcement Institute. For more information and to find a welded wire reinforcement producer near you, visit www.wirereinforcementinstitute.org.